My hands were trembling as I stared at the emergency evaluation paperwork on my kitchen counter. For the third time in 6 months, I had been admitted for evaluation to the hospital based on what my doctor called credible concerns about serious mental health concerns. The problem was, I had never expressed any in a dangerous headspace thoughts to anyone, ever. What I'm about to tell you is absolutely true and will leave you speechless. Please like and subscribe. Tell me which city you call home. My name is Catherine Sanders. I'm 47 years old, and I've been living what I thought was a perfectly normal life in suburban Phoenix until these mysterious hospitalizations started destroying everything I'd worked for. Each time, the same story. Someone close to me had contacted Dr. Harrison expressing grave concerns about my mental state. But when I asked who had called, patient confidentiality prevented him from telling me. "Mom, this is insane," my daughter Jessica said, pacing around my living room while I explained the latest incident. At 23, Jessica Sanders had inherited my stubborn streak and wasn't about to let this slide. "You're the most mentally stable person I know. You've never even taken antidepressants. Someone is lying to your doctor, and we need to figure out who." The timing was always suspicious. Each hospitalization happened right when something good was happening in my life. When I got promoted at the insurance company, when I started dating again after my divorce, when I finally saved enough to renovate the kitchen. 3 days locked in a psychiatric ward, losing pay, having to explain to neighbors why ambulances kept showing up at my house. "I've been thinking about this constantly," I told Jessica, spreading out a calendar on the coffee table. "Look at the dates. March 15th, June 8th, and now September 22nd. What do these all have in common?" Jessica leaned over the calendar, her long brown hair falling across her face as she studied the marked dates. "March was right before your promotion became official. June was the week after you started seeing that guy from work. And September—" She paused, looking up at me with concern. "That was supposed to be your first day back from vacation." "Exactly. Someone doesn't want me to be happy." The front door opened, and my neighbor Brenda Sanders called out her usual greeting. At 52, Brenda had been my closest friend since I moved to this neighborhood 8 years ago. She had her own key for emergencies and had been incredibly supportive through my divorce and these recent health scares. "Catherine, honey, I brought you some of that chamomile tea you like," Brenda said, bustling into the kitchen with grocery bags. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" "I was so worried when I saw the ambulance again." "I'm fine, Brenda. That's the problem. I'm always fine. But someone keeps telling Dr. Harrison that I'm not." Brenda set down her bags and joined us in the living room, her face creased with concern. "This is so bizarre. Have you considered that maybe Dr. Harrison is confused? Maybe he's getting his patients mixed up?" "I thought about that too, but he's been very specific. He says someone calls his office, claims to be a close friend or family member, and provides detailed information about concerning behavior they've witnessed." My son David walked in from the garage, wiping motor oil off his hands with a rag. At 26, David Sanders had moved back home temporarily to save money for his own place, and his protective instincts had been in overdrive since these incidents started. "I heard voices," David said, settling into the armchair across from us. "Are we talking about the mystery caller again?" "We have to figure this out, David. This isn't just embarrassing anymore. It's affecting my job. HR is asking questions about my reliability. My insurance is threatening to drop me if I keep having these emergency interventions." Brenda shook her head sympathetically. "It's just so cruel. Who would do something like this to you? You're one of the kindest people I know." "That's what I can't understand," Jessica said, still staring at the calendar. "Mom doesn't have enemies. She gets along with everyone at work, All the neighbors love her. Even her divorce was amicable. David leaned forward, his expression serious. What exactly does Dr. Harrison say when you ask him about these calls? He says the caller always sounds very concerned and knowledgeable about my daily routine. They mention specific things, like when I've been staying up late, or if I seem withdrawn, or if I've been talking about feeling hopeless. But Jessica, you live here half the time, and David, you're here every evening. Have either of you ever seen me exhibit any of these behaviors? Both of my children shook their heads emphatically. Never, Jessica said. If anything, you've been happier this year than I've seen you in ages. The caller also apparently mentions having keys to the house and being able to check on me regularly, I continued. Dr. Harrison says that level of access and concern convinced him the reports were credible. A strange silence fell over the room. Brenda had gone very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Keys to the house, David repeated slowly. Mom, who has keys besides us? I looked around the room, mentally cataloging the short list. Just you two, and Brenda for emergencies, and my sister in California has a spare, but she's 3 states away. Jessica was studying Brenda's face with the intensity she usually reserved for her law school textbooks. Mrs. Sanders, you've been here for all of these incidents, haven't you? You're always the first neighbor to come check on Mom afterward. Well, yes, because I care about your mother. We look out for each other. And you always seem to know exactly when they've happened, David added, his voice taking on a harder edge. Even when they occur during the day, while most neighbors are at work. I felt my stomach start to churn as pieces began clicking into place. Brenda, the last time, you brought me soup within an hour of me getting home from the hospital. I never told you what time I was being discharged. Brenda stood up abruptly, her face flushed. I should probably get home. I have dinner to prepare. Sit down, Brenda. My voice came out sharper than I intended. We need to talk about this. Catherine, I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything yet. I'm asking direct questions. How did you know I was coming home yesterday at 3 p.m.? The room felt electric with tension. Jessica had moved closer to me on the couch, while David remained perched on the edge of his chair, ready to spring into action if needed. Brenda's hands were shaking now. I happened to be looking out the window when your taxi pulled up. But you had hot soup ready. Soup that takes hours to make. I make soup every Tuesday. It was just a coincidence. David stood up. Mrs. Sanders, my mom has been like family to you for 8 years. If you know something about these phone calls to her doctor, you need to tell us right now. I don't know anything about phone calls, Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. I studied my friend's face, really looked at her for the first time in months. The woman who had celebrated every milestone with me, who had helped me paint the living room, who had held me while I cried through my divorce proceedings. The woman who had keys to my house and knew my schedule better than anyone. Oh my God, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Brenda, it's been you. Catherine, that's ridiculous. I would never. You would never what? You would never call my doctor pretending to be concerned? You would never use your intimate knowledge of my life to make your lies sound credible? Jessica gasped. Mom, are you saying Mrs. Sanders has been the one making these calls? I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. Brenda, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me you haven't been calling Dr. Harrison's office. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Brenda's face had gone pale, and she couldn't meet my gaze. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me? Tears started rolling down Brenda's cheeks. Catherine, you don't understand. I never meant for it to go this far. The confession hit the room like a bomb. David cursed under his breath. Jessica grabbed my arm, and I felt like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. You did do this, I said, my voice growing stronger with anger. You've been deliberately trying to have me committed to psychiatric hospitals. You've been sabotaging my job, my relationships, my reputation in this neighborhood. It wasn't supposed to happen multiple times, Brenda said desperately. The first call was just... I was angry, and I thought maybe you needed a wake-up call. A wake-up call about what? About how quickly your life was changing. You got that promotion, and suddenly you were working late all the time. Then you started dating again, and you barely had time for our coffee mornings anymore. You were pulling away from me? From our friendship? I stared at her in disbelief. So you decided to have me locked up in a mental hospital? I called once, thinking maybe they'd just talk to you, make you realize you were taking on too much stress. I never expected them to actually hospitalize you. David stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. But then you called 2 more times, even after seeing what it did to her. Brenda was crying harder now. After the first time, you came back so grateful to have people who cared about you. You spent more time at home. You broke up with that guy from work. Things went back to normal between us for a while. So when I started being happy again, you called again, Jessica said, her voice filled with disgust. I know how it sounds, but I was terrified of losing you, Catherine. You're my best friend. My only real friend. When you started pulling away, I panicked. I felt sick to my stomach. Brenda, do you have any idea what you've put me through? The humiliation, the fear, the damage to my career? I kept telling myself I would stop, but every time you started getting busy with other things, other people, you just decided to destroy my life to keep me dependent on you. The truth of it hung in the air between us. 8 years of friendship, of shared secrets and mutual support, all poisoned by jealousy and possessiveness I had never seen coming. Jessica stood up and moved protectively closer to me. Mrs. Sanders, you need to leave now. Catherine, please, we can work this out. I'll call Dr. Harrison and explain everything. I'll make this right. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Give me my key and get out. Brenda fumbled in her purse for the spare key, her hand shaking as she placed it on the coffee table. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, repeatedly, deliberately. She walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. Our friendship has meant everything to me. It meant everything to me too, I replied. Until you decided to weaponize it. After the front door closed behind Brenda, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. My daughter and son flanked me on the couch, and I felt simultaneously heartbroken and relieved. The mystery was solved, but the betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. I can't believe she admitted it, Jessica said finally. I can't believe she did it in the first place, David added. 8 years of friendship, and she throws it all away because she was jealous of your success. I stared at the spare key lying on my coffee table. Such a small object that had been used to cause so much damage. The worst part is, I genuinely cared about her. If she had just talked to me about feeling left out, we could have worked something out. Instead, she chose to systematically sabotage your mental health and professional reputation. Jessica said grimly. What happens now? David asked. I picked up the emergency evaluation paperwork I had been staring at when this conversation began. Everything looked different now. Not like evidence of my mental instability, but like evidence of Brenda's calculated manipulation. Now, I called Dr. Harrison and demand a meeting. I'm going to get this cleared up once and for all. But what I discovered next changed everything. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with Dr. Harrison's business card in my hand, rehearsing what I would say. Jessica had stayed the night, sleeping in her old room while David had gone home but promised to return before I made the call. You don't have to do this alone, Mom, Jessica said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. We can both be here when you call. I appreciate that, but this is something I need to handle myself. 8 years of having my words twisted and my mental state questioned, I need to be the one to set the record straight. David arrived just as I was dialing the number. He slipped quietly into the kitchen chair beside Jessica, both of them watching me with concerned expressions. Dr. Harrison's office, this is his assistant. This is Catherine Sanders. I need to schedule an emergency appointment with Dr. Harrison today. It's regarding the psychiatric holds that have been placed on me. There was a pause. Mrs. Sanders, I have notes here that you've been resistant to treatment. Are you calling to schedule a voluntary session? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Brenda's manipulation even in this conversation. I'm calling because I have new information about who has been contacting Dr. Harrison about my mental state, and it's not what anyone thinks. Hold, please. David reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing. Dr. Harrison can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon, the assistant said when she returned to the line. He's cleared his schedule. After I hung up, Jessica poured herself coffee and sat back down. How are you feeling about seeing him? Honestly? Terrified. What if he doesn't believe me? What if the damage is already done? Mom, you have proof now, David said. Brenda admitted everything in front of witnesses. But it's still my word against months of documented concerns from someone he viewed as a caring friend. Jessica leaned forward. You know what's different now, though? You're not going in there confused and defensive. You know exactly what happened and who did it. I nodded, but my stomach was still churning. I keep thinking about all those sessions where he looked at me like I was in denial about my own mental state. How many times did he think I was lying when I said I felt fine? That's not your fault, David said firmly. Brenda manipulated both of you. I know that logically, but emotionally, I trailed off, staring into my coffee. I trusted her completely. When she would show up after these episodes, so concerned and caring, I actually felt grateful to have such a devoted friend. She was counting on that, Jessica said. She knew exactly how to play both sides. The morning crawled by. I found myself pacing the house, picking up objects and setting them down, unable to concentrate on anything. David had taken the day off work to stay with me, and Jessica had rearranged her schedule. You two don't need to babysit me, I said around noon. We're not babysitting, Jessica replied. We're supporting you. There's a difference. Besides, David added, after everything that's happened, can you blame us for wanting to stick close today? At 1:30, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear to convince a psychiatrist that I was mentally stable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just be yourself, Mom, Jessica called through the door. Don't overthink it. The drive to Dr. Harrison's office felt surreal. I had made this trip so many times in crisis mode, either voluntarily after Brenda's interventions or involuntarily after the psychiatric holds. Today felt different. like I was finally going to reclaim my own narrative. "Mrs. Sanders," Dr. Harrison said as I entered his office. His expression was cautious, professional. "I understand you have some new information to share." "Dr. Harrison, everything you think you know about my mental state has been based on lies?" He gestured for me to sit down. "That's a serious accusation. Can you help me understand what you mean?" I took a deep breath and began with Brenda's confession the night before. I walked him through her admission of jealousy, her deliberate timing of the crisis calls, her access to my home. "She had a key to my house," I explained. "She could observe my routine, know when I was having good days, and then call you claiming I was in a dangerous headspace. She timed it perfectly to make me look unstable and keep me dependent on her." Dr. Harrison was taking notes, but his expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Sanders, these are very serious allegations against someone who has consistently expressed genuine concern for your welfare." "I know how it sounds, but she admitted it. My daughter and son were both witnesses." "People sometimes say things in anger that they don't mean." I felt my frustration rising. "Dr. Harrison, in the past 8 years, have I ever actually exhibited genuine in a dangerous headspace behavior during our sessions?" He paused, reviewing his notes. "You've been resistant to discussing your feelings." "Because I wasn't having the feelings Brenda claimed I was having. I was confused and defensive because I was being accused of something that wasn't true." "Mrs. Sanders, depression and serious mental health concerns can be very difficult for patients to recognize in themselves." "Then explain this," I said, leaning forward. "Brenda called you 3 days ago claiming I was in crisis. Where is the evidence of that crisis? What did you observe when you saw me that day that confirmed her concerns?" Dr. Harrison flipped through his notes, and I saw something shift in his expression. "You seemed surprised to be there," he said slowly. "Because I was surprised. Because there was no crisis." He continued reading, and I could see him connecting dots he had never connected before. "You consistently reported feeling fine, just stressed about work." "Exactly, because that's exactly how I was feeling." We sat in silence for several minutes while he reviewed his files. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before: uncertainty. "Mrs. Sanders, if what you're saying is true, then we have a very serious problem." "We have a serious problem either way," I replied. "The question is whether you're willing to help me fix it." But what Dr. Harrison told me next revealed something I never could have prepared for. Dr. Harrison set down his pen and looked at me with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Sanders, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear. Brenda isn't the only person who has been calling me about you." The room seemed to tilt. "What do you mean?" "I've been receiving calls from your daughter as well. Jessica has contacted me multiple times over the years, expressing concerns about your mental state." I felt like I'd been punched. "That's impossible. Jessica would have told me." "The calls were always consistent with Brenda's reports. Jessica would call within hours of Brenda, confirming the same concerns about your behavior, your statements, your apparent decline." My hands started shaking. "No, Jessica wouldn't do that. She's been helping me figure this out. She heard Brenda's confession." Dr. Harrison pulled out a different file. "I have documentation going back 6 years of Jessica calling to report that you had made concerning statements to her about not wanting to go on, about feeling hopeless." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter. The one person I thought I could trust completely. "There's more," Dr. Harrison continued gently. "The pattern of calls suggests coordination. Brenda would call first, usually in the morning, then Jessica would call that afternoon or the next day, corroborating the story with additional details. I couldn't breathe properly. You're saying they've been working together? I'm saying the timing and consistency of their reports created a very convincing picture of someone in crisis who was hiding their symptoms from me during appointments. My mind raced back to the night before. Jessica's shock, her anger at Brenda, her promise to help me sort this out. Had it all been an act? Had she been covering her tracks, preparing for this moment when the truth would come out? Dr. Harrison, I need to see those records. I need to know exactly what my daughter said about me. He hesitated. Mrs. Sanders, perhaps we should schedule another appointment when you've had time to process this information. No. My voice was stronger than I felt. I need to know now. What did Jessica tell you? He opened the file reluctantly. The most recent call was 2 weeks ago. Jessica reported that you had told her you sometimes wished you could just disappear, that you felt like a burden to everyone you cared about. I remembered that conversation. I had been stressed about being late to pick up David from school because of an unexpected work meeting. I had said something about wishing I could be in 2 places at once, that I felt bad for always seeming to let someone down with my scheduling conflicts. She twisted everything, I whispered. Every normal conversation, every moment of regular stress or frustration. According to my notes, Jessica was often the one who suggested the hospitalizations were necessary. She expressed fear that you might hurt yourself if left alone. The room felt like it was spinning. Jessica had been there for every single hospitalization, holding my hand, reassuring me that it was for the best, that she just wanted me to be safe. She had looked me in the eyes and lied with such convincing concern. I need to go, I said, standing abruptly. Mrs. Sanders, I think we should continue this conversation. If there has been a misunderstanding of this magnitude, we need to address it properly. But I was already heading for the door. I needed to get home. I needed to confront Jessica before she could prepare more lies, before she could convince David that I was having some kind of breakdown. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying moments over the years, conversations with Jessica that had seemed supportive, but now felt sinister. How many times had she steered conversations toward my mental health? How many times had she asked leading questions about my mood, my stress levels, my coping mechanisms? I pulled into my driveway and saw Jessica's car already there. Through the living room window, I could see her sitting at my kitchen table with David, both of them looking serious. They were waiting for me. As I walked toward my front door, I realized that Dr. Harrison's revelation was just the beginning. If Jessica had been working with Brenda all these years, then everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. And now I had to figure out how deep this deception went and what they were planning to do next. I stood on my own front porch, keys trembling in my hand, watching my son and my best friend through the window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the familiar scene, but everything felt foreign now. The kitchen, where I had shared countless cups of coffee with Jessica, where she had listened to my worries and offered comfort, now felt like a stage set for an elaborate performance. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The conversation at the kitchen table stopped abruptly. "Mom?" David looked up from his homework, his 15-year-old face creased with concern. "Jessica said you had a rough appointment with Dr. Harrison today." My blood ran cold. I had driven straight home from the doctor's office. There was no way Jessica could have known about my appointment unless she had been in contact with Dr. Harrison, or worse, unless this whole thing had been orchestrated. Did she now? I set my purse down carefully on the counter, my eyes never leaving Jessica's face. She sat composed as always, her auburn hair pulled back in that perfect ponytail, wearing her usual expression of gentle concern. But now, I could see something else lurking beneath it, something calculating. I was worried when you didn't answer my texts, Jessica said smoothly. I thought I'd wait here with David until you got back. I hope that's okay? Of course it's okay, I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Jessica's always welcome here, isn't she, David? My son nodded, but I caught the flicker of confusion in his dark eyes. He was perceptive, had always been able to read the undercurrents in adult conversations. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Actually, Jessica, I'm glad you're here, I continued, moving to stand behind David's chair, my hands resting protectively on his shoulders. I learned some very interesting things at my appointment today. Jessica's smile never wavered, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly around her coffee mug. Oh? I hope Dr. Harrison was helpful. Extremely helpful. I could feel David looking back and forth between us, sensing the subtext he couldn't quite grasp. He told me about the calls he's been receiving, about someone who's been very concerned about my mental health. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Jessica's composure was impressive. I had to give her that. Years of practice, I supposed. Mom, what's going on? David pushed back from the table slightly, turning in his chair to look up at me. You're scaring me a little. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I squeezed his shoulders gently. I don't mean to scare you. I'm just trying to understand something. Jessica, would you like to explain to David how you've been helping to coordinate my hospital stays? Now Jessica's mask slipped, just for a moment. A flash of something cold crossed her features before she recovered. Margaret, I think you might be confused. Maybe we should talk about this privately. No, I said firmly. I think David is old enough to hear this. After all, he's been affected by every single one of my hospitalizations. All those nights wondering if his mom was going crazy. All those times you reassured him that I was getting the help I needed. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. What are you talking about? Jessica helped us during those times. She stayed with me. She made sure I was okay when you were sick. The pain in his voice was like a knife to my heart. He was defending her, the woman who had been systematically destroying our family for years. I was never sick, David. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth after so many years of believing otherwise. At least, not in the way we thought. Jessica stood too, her coffee mug clattering against the table. Margaret, you're clearly having some kind of episode. Maybe I should call Dr. Harrison. Please do, I said, pulling my phone from my purse and sliding it across the table toward her. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you again. You two seem to have such regular conversations about me. David looked between us, his face pale. Will someone please just tell me what's happening? I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain years of manipulation to my teenage son without completely destroying his trust in everyone around him. David, you know how sometimes I've had to go to the hospital when I was feeling overwhelmed or sad? He nodded slowly. Well, it turns out that someone has been calling Dr. Harrison, telling him that I said things I never said, that I was thinking about hurting myself when I wasn't. That's impossible, David said immediately. Who would do that? Jessica was backing toward the kitchen door now, her face flushed. Margaret, I think you need to calm down. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I replied. The question is, why? Why would someone who claims to love me want to make me think I was losing my mind? David's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. He looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and I saw the moment when the pieces started falling into place for him too. Jessica? His voice was small, younger than his 15 years. Is that true? She stopped backing away, her hand on the kitchen doorframe. For a long moment, she just stared at us, and I wondered if she would finally tell the truth. Instead, she pulled out her own phone. I'm calling Brenda, she said quietly. I think it's time. I felt ice form in my veins at those words. What do you mean, it's time? Time for what? Jessica's fingers were already moving across her phone screen, and I could hear the faint ringing through the speaker. David stepped closer to me, his face pale with confusion and growing fear. Jessica, hang up the phone, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk about this. She shook her head, holding up one finger as if asking us to wait. Brenda? Yes, it's me. I need you to come over to Margaret's house right away. Who is Brenda? David whispered to me, but I was too focused on Jessica's conversation to answer immediately. Yes, she's having another episode. Worse than usual this time. She's making accusations. She seems paranoid. Jessica's eyes met mine across the kitchen, and there was something cold in them I'd never seen before. She's talking about Dr. Harrison saying things that don't make sense. I lunged for the phone, but Jessica stepped back quickly. Jessica, stop this right now. Whatever game you're playing, it ends here. David grabbed my arm, not to restrain me, but for support. Mom, who is Brenda? What's happening? I don't know, I admitted, my heart racing as I watched Jessica continue her conversation in low tones. I've never heard that name before. She's agitated. Jessica continued into the phone. Getting physical. Yes, I think you should call ahead and let them know we might be bringing her in. The words hit me like a physical blow. This was it happening again, right in front of my eyes. But this time, I was watching the machinery in motion, seeing how the trap was being set. David, do you hear this? I said urgently. Do you see what she's doing? My son's face had gone from pale to ashen. He was staring at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. Jessica, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Hang up the phone. She looked at him in surprise, still holding the device to her ear. David, your mother needs help. She's not well. I said, hang up the phone. His voice was stronger now, more sure. Right now. For a moment, Jessica just stood there, clearly torn between continuing her conversation and dealing with David's unexpected resistance. Brenda, let me call you back, she said finally, ending the call but keeping the phone clutched in her hand. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of our breathing. David moved to stand beside me, and I felt a surge of gratitude that nearly brought me to tears. How long? He asked Jessica quietly. How long have you been doing this to her? David, you don't understand, Jessica began, but he cut her off. I understand plenty. I understand that every time Mom went to the hospital, you were the one who found her in crisis. You were the one who called for help. You were the one who stayed with me while she was gone. I watched my son piece it together, his young mind working through years of manipulation and lies. You were always there, he continued, his voice getting stronger. Always the hero, always the one who saved the day, and I thanked you for it. Jessica's composure was starting to crack. I was trying to help her. She needed help. No, David said firmly. You needed her to need help. That's different. I put my hand on his shoulder, amazed by his insight and strength. David, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted gently. I should have seen it before. All those times you tried to tell me you felt fine, that you didn't understand why everyone was so worried. I thought you just couldn't see how sick you were. Jessica was backing toward the kitchen door again, her phone still in her hand. This is insane. You're both having some kind of shared delusion. Am I? David asked. Then prove it. Show me the text between you and Dr. Harrison. I don't text with your mother's doctor, Jessica said quickly. You just called someone named Brenda and told her to call ahead to some hospital, I pointed out. How exactly would that work if you're not involved in my medical care? Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. David stepped forward. Give me your phone. Absolutely not. Then give it to Mom. David, I'm trying to protect both of you. From what? He demanded, and I heard real anger in his voice for the first time. From the truth? Jessica looked between us, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out her next move. The phone in her hand buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, and whatever she saw there made her face go white. Who is it? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Jessica stared at the phone as it continued buzzing, her hand trembling slightly. It's Dr. Harrison, she whispered. The phone continued buzzing in Jessica's trembling hand, and for a moment none of us moved. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in my kitchen, cutting through the tension like a blade. Answer it, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Put it on speaker. Jessica shook her head quickly. That's not necessary. It's probably just a routine check-in. On a Saturday evening? David asked. When you just called someone named Brenda about getting Mom admitted somewhere? The phone stopped buzzing, but almost immediately started again. Dr. Harrison was persistent. I'd give him that. If you don't answer it, I said, moving closer to Jessica. I will. Something in my tone must have convinced her that I meant it, because she swiped to accept the call. She didn't put it on speaker, but she held the phone away from her ear just enough that we could all hear Dr. Harrison's familiar voice. Jessica, I got your message about Catherine having another episode, but I have to tell you, I'm concerned about the frequency of these incidents. I felt David go rigid beside me. Catherine. My name was Catherine, and hearing Dr. Harrison say it so casually to Jessica, as if this was their normal routine, made everything click into place with horrible clarity. Dr. Harrison? Jessica said, her voice artificially bright. Now isn't a good time to talk. I understand you're dealing with a crisis, but Jessica, I need to be honest with you. I've been reviewing Catherine's file, and something isn't adding up. The woman I see in my office doesn't match the person you describe in these emergency situations. Jessica's face had gone from pale to flushed. She kept glancing toward the kitchen door like she was planning an escape route. What do you mean? She asked, though I could tell she knew exactly what he meant. I mean that Catherine consistently presents as stable, coherent, and frankly confused about why she's being brought in for psychiatric evaluation. Her responses to my questions don't indicate someone who's been expressing serious mental health concerns. David stepped forward and held out his hand. Give me the phone, Jessica. No, Give it to me, or I'll call Dr. Harrison myself and tell him exactly what we just figured out. Jessica looked trapped, her eyes darting between David and me. The phone was still pressed to her ear, and I could hear Dr. Harrison saying her name, asking if she was still there. Jessica, I said quietly. It's over. Whatever game this has been, whatever you've been getting out of it, it's done. She clutched the phone tighter. You don't understand what it's been like, watching you fall apart after David left. Watching you pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Someone had to take care of you. By lying to my doctor? The anger I'd been suppressing finally broke through. By having me committed when there was nothing wrong with me? There was something wrong with you, Jessica insisted. You were depressed. You were struggling. You needed help, and you were too proud to ask for it. So you decided to ask for me? David's voice was incredulous. You decided to tell doctors that my mom wanted to do something drastic? Dr. Harrison's voice came through the phone again, more insistent now. Jessica, I need you to respond. Are you saying Catherine is currently in crisis? Jessica looked at the phone in her hand like it had become a venomous snake. She could lie again, continue the pattern that had apparently been going on for months, or she could tell the truth. She started, then stopped. Tell him the truth, I said. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him you made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. David moved to stand directly in front of her. Jessica, my mom has been hospitalized 4 times in the past 6 months because of your phone calls. 4 times I thought I might lose her. Do you understand what that did to me? I saw tears start to form in Jessica's eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The phone had gone quiet, and I realized Dr. Harrison had hung up. Jessica stared at the silent screen, and I knew he would be calling back soon, or worse, sending someone to check on me. He's going to call the police, Jessica said quietly. When I don't respond appropriately to a wellness check, protocol is to send officers to your house. My stomach dropped. How do you know the protocol? Jessica wiped her eyes with her free hand. Because I've researched this extensively. I knew exactly what to say and when to say it to get the response I wanted. David sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. This is unreal. This is actually unreal. We need to call Dr. Harrison back? I said, my mind racing. We need to explain what happened before police show up at my door thinking I'm in a dangerous headspace. And tell him what, exactly? Jessica asked. That I've been systematically lying to him for months? That every emergency call was fabricated? Do you know what kind of trouble I could get in? What kind of trouble you could get in? I stared at her in disbelief. Jessica, what about what you've done to me? Before she could answer, her phone started buzzing again. Jessica's phone buzzed insistently in her hand, Dr. Harrison's name flashing on the screen. She stared at it like it might explode. Answer it, I said firmly, and tell him the truth. I can't just... Yes, you can. David stood up from the kitchen chair, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. You got us into this mess with your lies. Now you're going to get us out of it with the truth. Jessica's hand trembled as she swiped to answer. Dr. Harrison? Jessica, I need you to clarify what's happening. Your call was cut off, and I'm concerned about Catherine's immediate safety. I could hear his voice clearly in the quiet kitchen. Jessica looked at me, then at David, her face pale and drawn. Dr. Harrison, she started, then stopped. I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. There was a pause on the other end. Go ahead. Catherine isn't in crisis right now. She's standing right here in her kitchen with David, and she's fine. I don't understand. You called to report that she was expressing serious mental health concerns. Jessica closed her eyes. I know I did, and I was wrong to do that. David moved closer to the phone, his jaw clenched. I could see him struggling with whether to grab it and take over the conversation entirely. Jessica. Dr. Harrison's voice carried a note of confusion mixed with something sharper. Are you telling me you made an error in your assessment of Catherine's mental state? I'm telling you that I've been making errors for months. Jessica's voice broke slightly. Catherine hasn't been in a dangerous headspace. I've been calling you because I thought she needed help, but I was wrong about how I went about it. The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I see, Dr. Harrison finally said, his tone completely professional now. Jessica, I'm going to need to speak with Catherine directly. Jessica held the phone out to me with a shaking hand. I took it, my own hands steadier than I'd expected them to be. Dr. Harrison, this is Catherine. Catherine, can you confirm that you're safe and not experiencing thoughts of unsafe behavior? I can confirm that, yes. I'm not in a dangerous headspace. I haven't been in a dangerous headspace. Jessica has been... I paused, looking at my friend, who was now sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Jessica has been concerned about me, but her concerns were misplaced. Catherine, I need you to understand that this situation is highly unusual. The reports I've been receiving painted a very different picture of your mental state. David gestured for the phone, and I handed it to him. Dr. Harrison, this is David, Catherine's son. I think you need to know that my mother has been involuntarily hospitalized 4 times in the past 6 months, based on Jessica's phone calls. Each time, the hospital staff found no evidence of serious mental health concerns and released her within 24 to 48 hours. I heard Dr. Harrison intake breath sharply. I wasn't aware of the hospitalizations. Because they weren't necessary. David continued, his voice growing stronger. My mother has been trying to tell everyone that she was fine, but no one would listen because Jessica kept insisting otherwise. Jessica looked up from the table, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was helping. Catherine seemed so sad after her divorce, so withdrawn. I was scared she was going to do something harmful. But I told you repeatedly that I was okay, I said, taking the phone back from David. Dr. Harrison, I told Jessica multiple times that I wasn't in a dangerous headspace, that I was just adjusting to major life changes. She wouldn't believe me. Catherine, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you had overwhelming, intrusive thoughts in the past 6 months? No, absolutely not. I've been sad, yes. I've been stressed about the divorce and adjusting to living alone. But I have never once considered hurting myself. David sat down across from Jessica at the table. Jessica, why couldn't you just trust what my mom was telling you? Jessica wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Because sometimes people who are depressed don't recognize how bad things are. Sometimes they minimize their feelings, or they don't want to burden other people with their problems. So, you decided to speak for me, I said, feeling the anger rise again. You decided that you knew better than I did about my own mental state. I was terrified of losing you, Jessica said quietly. After everything you went through with the divorce, seeing you so isolated and quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that you were in danger. From myself, I said. You thought I was in danger from myself? Yes. Dr. Harrison's voice came through the phone again. I'm going to need to see you in my office tomorrow, Catherine. We need to discuss this situation in detail and reassess your treatment plan. Of course, I said. And Dr. Harrison? I don't want Jessica involved in my medical care anymore. I don't want her calling you. I don't want her at my appointments. And I don't want any information shared with her. Jessica flinched like I'd slapped her. That's completely understandable, Dr. Harrison said. Jessica, I'll need to speak with you as well. What you've described raises serious concerns about your understanding of mental health protocols and appropriate intervention. Jessica nodded, even though he couldn't see her, then seemed to realize she needed to respond verbally. I understand. After we ended the call, the three of us sat in my kitchen in heavy silence. David was staring at Jessica with a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Jessica was still crying quietly, her hands folded in her lap, and I felt strangely empty, like all the fight had drained out of me at once. I don't know how to fix this, Jessica finally said. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know if you can, David said bluntly. I looked at my son, then at my friend, and realized that everything had changed between us in the space of an hour. The trust that had taken years to build had been shattered, and I wasn't sure it could be rebuilt, but there was something else I needed to know. Jessica, I said slowly, how long have you been planning this? How long have you been researching protocols and planning what to say to get me hospitalized? She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop all over again. Jessica's face crumpled further, and she pressed her hands against her eyes. About 3 weeks, she whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 weeks. Not an impulsive moment of panic, not a desperate reaction to something I'd said or done. 3 weeks of deliberate planning. 3 weeks, I repeated, my voice flat. You've been planning to have me committed for 3 weeks. Not committed, Jessica said quickly, looking up. I never wanted that. I just wanted to get you help, to make sure someone was paying attention to what I was seeing. David leaned forward in his chair, his jaw tight. What exactly were you seeing, Jessica? Because I've been here every week, sometimes twice a week. I've been watching my mom carefully because I was worried too after the divorce. And you know what I saw? Someone who was sad, someone who was processing a major life change, but someone who was handling it. You don't see her every day, Jessica said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. You don't see how she is when she's alone. Neither do you, I said sharply. You see me when we have lunch twice a week, when we go shopping on weekends. That's not every day, Jessica. She shook her head. But the things you were saying, about feeling like you didn't know who you were anymore, about feeling disconnected from everything, about how quiet your house was. I stared at her. Those are normal things to feel after a 20-year marriage ends, Jessica. Those are normal things to say to your best friend when you're processing grief. But combined with everything else, she insisted. The way you stopped making plans for the future. The way you talked about feeling invisible. David ran his hands through his hair. Jessica, that's called depression. Regular depression that people work through with therapy and time, not serious mental health concerns. How was I supposed to know the difference? Jessica's voice rose slightly. I'm not a mental health professional. All I knew was that my best friend was saying things that scared me, and when I looked up those symptoms online, everything pointed to someone who might be at risk. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I felt something cold settle in my chest as the full picture became clear. You diagnosed me, I said slowly. You went online, you read about depression and serious mental health concerns, and you decided that's what was happening to me. Jessica wiped her nose with a tissue from her purse. I was trying to be responsible. I was trying to be a good friend. A good friend would have talked to me, David said. A good friend would have said, Catherine, I'm worried about you. Let's talk about getting you some extra support. I tried that, Jessica said. Remember when I suggested you call Dr. Harrison for an earlier appointment? Remember when I offered to drive you to therapy? I did remember those conversations, but they felt different now, loaded with an agenda I hadn't recognized at the time. Those weren't honest conversations, I said. You weren't asking me how you could help. You were already convinced I was in a dangerous headspace, and you were trying to manage me. Jessica's shoulders sagged. I was scared. I kept thinking about what would happen if something happened to you, and I hadn't done everything I could to prevent it. But nothing was going to happen to me, I said, feeling frustrated tears building behind my eyes. I was sad, Jessica. I was grieving. I was figuring out how to rebuild my life. But I was never, not once, in a dangerous headspace. How could I have known that for sure? She asked. You could have asked me, I said simply. You could have trusted me to tell you the truth about my own life. David looked between us, then focused on Jessica. When you called Dr. Harrison those times, what exactly did you tell him? Jessica shifted uncomfortably. I told him that you were exhibiting signs of severe depression, that you were talking about feeling disconnected and purposeless, that you seemed to be withdrawing from life. Did you tell him I said I wanted to do something harmful? I asked. Not directly, she said quietly. But I may have implied that I was concerned about your safety. The weight of her words settled over the room. She may have implied. The careful language of someone who knew exactly what response they were trying to trigger. Jessica, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand what you've done? She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, and I realized that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the manipulation, she genuinely didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, and that scared me more than anything else. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Jessica sat hunched forward on the couch, tissues clutched in her hands, while David remained standing near the window, his arms crossed. The late afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across my living room floor, and I realized we'd been talking for over an hour without resolving anything. Jessica, I said again, trying to keep my voice steady. I need you to understand something. When you called Dr. Harrison and implied I might do something harmful, you set off a chain of events that I couldn't control. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. But you're okay. You're here. You're safe. I'm here because I fought to be here, I said, feeling the anger creep back into my voice despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you know what it's like to have someone in a position of authority decide that your own assessment of your mental state doesn't matter? To be told that your protests are just part of the illness? David moved away from the window and sat down in the chair across from us. Jessica, can I ask you something? When you decided Catherine was in a dangerous headspace, did you ever consider that you might be wrong? Jessica shifted uncomfortably, the leather couch creaking under her movement. I kept hoping I was wrong, but the signs seemed so clear. She was sleeping all the time. She wasn't eating regularly. She'd canceled plans with friends. Those are signs of grief, I said. Those are signs of someone whose life has been turned upside down and who's trying to figure out how to move forward. But they're also signs of depression, Jessica said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. I looked it up. I read articles. The symptoms overlap. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Jessica, I'm trying to understand your thought process here. When you read those articles, did any of them suggest that the best course of action was to go behind someone's back to their doctor? Jessica's face flushed. They said to take threats of self-destructive act seriously. They said not to ignore warning signs. But I never threatened self-destructive act, I said, my voice rising slightly. I never even mentioned self-destructive act. You created that narrative in your head based on what you thought my behavior meant. The room fell quiet, except for the tick of the wall clock and the distant sound of traffic outside. I watched Jessica struggle with something, her hands twisting the tissue until it fell apart in small white pieces on her lap. I lost someone once, she said finally, her voice barely audible. In college, my roommate. She seemed fine one day, and then… She trailed off, staring at her hands. David and I exchanged glances. This was the first time Jessica had mentioned anything like this. She do something drastic, Jessica continued. Left no note, gave no warning, at least no warning that any of us recognized. Afterwards, we all went over every conversation, every interaction, wondering if there had been signs we'd missed. I felt something shift in my chest, a small crack in the wall of anger I'd built up. Jessica, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I swore I would never miss the signs again, she said, looking up at me with tears streaming down her face. I swore I would never lose someone because I didn't act when I should have. David spoke gently. But Jessica, that doesn't give you the right to override Catherine's autonomy. Your trauma, as real and painful as it is, doesn't justify what you did. Jessica flinched as if he'd slapped her. I know that. I mean, I'm starting to understand that. But in the moment, when I was watching her withdraw and struggle, all I could think about was Amy. My roommate's name was Amy. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The revelation about Jessica's past explained so much, but it also complicated everything. How do you stay angry at someone whose actions came from a place of genuine trauma and fear? Jessica, I said carefully, I understand why you were scared. I can even understand why you might have misinterpreted what you were seeing. But you have to understand that your fear doesn't justify what happened to me. She nodded, wiping her nose. I know. I think I know. It's just hard to separate what happened to Amy from what I thought was happening to you. David stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning with a glass of water that he handed to Jessica. She accepted it gratefully, taking small sips while we all sat in the weight of her revelation. The thing is, I said after a few minutes, even if you were genuinely concerned about my safety, there were other options. You could have talked to me directly about your fears. You could have asked me to have an honest conversation about my mental health. Would you have been honest? Jessica asked. The question hung in the air, and I realized it deserved a real answer. Would I have been honest if Jessica had come to me and said she was worried I might do something harmful? Would I have been offended? Dismissive? I think I would have been, I said slowly. It might have been an uncomfortable conversation, but yes, I think I would have told you the truth, that I was sad and lost and grieving, but that I wasn't in a dangerous headspace, that I was working with Dr. Harrison on coping strategies, and that I was committed to getting better. But what if you couldn't see it yourself? Jessica pressed. What if you were too deep in it to recognize the danger? David set his empty coffee mug on the side table with a soft clink. Jessica, that's not your call to make. You're not a mental health professional. You're not Catherine's parent or spouse. You're her friend, and friends don't get to make unilateral decisions about each other's medical care based on their own fears and assumptions. I watched Jessica process his words, seeing the struggle play out across her face. She wanted to argue, I could tell. Some part of her still believed she'd done the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. So, What happens now? She asked finally. It was a question I'd been dreading because I honestly didn't know the answer. The rational part of me understood that Jessica's actions had come from a place of love and fear. But the part of me that had experienced the violation, the loss of control, the feeling of being betrayed by someone I trusted, that part wasn't ready to forgive and move on. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to think about all of this, about what you've told me today, about what our friendship means, about whether I can trust you again. Jessica's face crumpled. Catherine, please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I can't lose you too. I can't lose another friend. The desperation in her voice broke something open in my chest, but I held firm. Jessica, you can't put that on me. You can't make me responsible for your healing or your peace of mind. That's part of what got us into this mess in the first place. David nodded approvingly, and I felt grateful for his presence, for having someone who could witness this conversation and help me stay grounded. You're right, Jessica said quietly. You're absolutely right. I'm doing it again, aren't I? Making my feelings your responsibility. Yes, I said simply. You are. Jessica stood up abruptly, her water glass wobbling on the couch cushion. I should go. I should give you space to think. She paused at the edge of the living room, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Catherine, I know you might not believe this, but I really thought I was saving your life. I really thought I was being the friend Amy needed, and never had. After she left, David and I sat in the gathering dusk, neither of us moving to turn on the lights. I felt emotionally drained, like I'd run a marathon while carrying a heavy pack. What do you think? I asked him. David was quiet for a long time. I think she believes everything she told you. I also think she's more fragile than either of us realized, and that makes her potentially dangerous in ways she doesn't understand. His words sent a chill through me. Dangerous how? Think about it, David said. She just told us that she's been carrying around survivor's guilt for years, that she's essentially appointed herself as a self-destructive act prevention specialist for her friend group. What happens the next time someone in her life goes through a rough patch? I hadn't considered that angle, but as soon as he said it, I realized he was right. Jessica's revelation hadn't just explained her behavior toward me. It had revealed a pattern that could repeat itself with devastating consequences. God, I whispered, what if she does this to someone else? But before David could answer, my phone rang. Dr. Harrison's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach dropped. He never called in the evenings unless something was wrong. Very wrong. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The living room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows from the unlit corners pressing in around us. David leaned forward, his eyes fixed on my face as I hesitated to answer. It could be routine, I said, but my voice came out thin and unconvincing. Dr. Harrison had never called me at home before, not once in the 3 years I'd been seeing him. The phone continued its insistent ringing, the sound cutting through the quiet evening like an alarm. I finally swiped to answer, my palm damp against the screen. Hello? Catherine, I'm glad I caught you. Dr. Harrison's voice was careful, measured in that way that immediately set off warning bells in my head. I wanted to follow up about our conversation today. I've been thinking about what you told me, about the concerns your friend raised. The blood drained from my face. I looked at David, whose expression had gone grim. He could hear enough of the conversation to understand that something was very wrong. Dr. Harrison, I thought we cleared that up. I told you Jessica was mistaken about my mental state. Yes, you did, and I want to believe that, Catherine. But I have to tell you, she called my office again this afternoon. She seemed very distressed, very concerned about leaving you alone tonight. The words hit me like ice water. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles going white. She called you again? After what we discussed? David was on his feet now, pacing to the window and back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The evening light caught the tension in his shoulders, the rigid line of his jaw. She did. She said she was worried that you might have seemed better in my office because you were putting on an act for her benefit. She was quite convincing, Catherine. She knew details about your recent behavior patterns, your sleep schedule, things that suggested she's been observing you very closely. My stomach twisted into knots. The conversation with Jessica just an hour ago took on a sinister new dimension. While she'd been sitting in my living room, apologizing and explaining about Amy, had she already been planning her next move? Had the tears and remorse been another manipulation? Dr. Harrison, everything I told you today was true. I am not in a dangerous headspace. Jessica has been interfering in my life in ways that are completely inappropriate. I hear you saying that. But Catherine, you have to understand my position. If there's even a chance that you're in crisis and hiding it from me, I have an ethical obligation to act. The room felt like it was spinning slightly. I sank deeper into the couch cushions, pressing my free hand against my forehead. What does that mean, exactly? It means I think we should consider a brief inpatient evaluation, just to be safe, just to make sure we're not missing anything important. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Absolutely not. You cannot hospitalize me based on the word of someone who has been systematically lying to you. David stopped pacing and moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring beside me. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. Catherine, I can hear that you're getting upset. That's understandable. But your emotional response right now is actually concerning to me. It's consistent with what Jessica described. Of course I'm upset. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Someone has been sabotaging my life, and now you're threatening to lock me up because of it. How exactly should I be responding? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Dr. Harrison weighing my words, analyzing my tone for signs of instability. The clinical distance in his silence made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. Jessica mentioned that you might react this way. She said you'd likely become defensive and angry if confronted about your condition. The manipulation was so perfect, so complete, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Jessica had created an impossible situation where any reaction I had would be used as evidence against me. Calm acceptance would prove I was dangerously detached from reality. Emotional response proved I was unstable. There was no way to win. David must have seen something in my expression because he held out his hand for the phone. I shook my head, but he persisted, his eyes steady and calm. Let me, he mouthed. I hesitated, then handed him the phone. His voice when he spoke was controlled, professional. Dr. Harrison, this is David, Catherine's brother. I've been with her all evening, and I can tell you with complete certainty that she is not in crisis. She's upset because someone she trusted has been lying about her, which is a completely rational response. I could hear the murmur of Dr. Harrison's voice, but couldn't make out the words. David listened for a long moment, his free hand running through his hair. No, I understand your position, but you need to understand ours. Catherine is being harassed by someone who has admitted to a pattern of this behavior. This isn't about mental health. It's about manipulation and control. Another pause. David's jaw tightened. "We'll be there in an hour," he said finally, then handed me back the phone. "Catherine, I think it would be best if you came in tonight so we can sort this out properly. Your brother has agreed to drive you." My heart sank. "And if I refuse?" "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Come in voluntarily, and we can keep this as low-key as possible. I'll be there to evaluate you personally, and if you're right about your mental state, you could be home by tomorrow morning." After I hung up, the living room felt impossibly quiet. David sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "This is insane," I whispered. "It is, but we're going to get through it." His voice was firm, determined. "And tomorrow, we're going to figure out how to stop Jessica from doing this to anyone else." As we sat there in the growing darkness, I realized that Jessica's final manipulation might have been the most revealing of all. She hadn't just been trying to control me. She'd been setting up a scenario where she could be proven right, where my commitment to a psychiatric facility would validate her actions retroactively. She could tell herself, and anyone who asked, that she'd saved my life. The thought terrified me more than the prospect of the hospital.